Welcome back to another week of Kernel at the Buzzer. I'm your host, Kai McClelland. Before we start today's podcast, we want to remind you that everyone's opinions today is their opinions only, and it does not reflect the entire Kernel. Unfortunately, our beloved co-host AJ Nava is not feeling well today, so I will be doing your sports recap for this week. Starting off, men's tennis begun their season. They were number 7 preseason, but before their loss at Michigan State, they're going to drop down to number 12 in the nation. They're now 2-1 to start the season. The Rifle team is red hot. They just beat Memphis and Murray State, and they're still undefeated on the season. In a soft opening for UK gymnastics, number 8 Kentucky took down number 3 Alabama, scoring a season high in points. Number 8 Kentucky men's basketball suffered a loss to number 4 Alabama here at Rupp Arena, losing 102-97, ruining their undefeated record at home this season. Number 12 Kentucky women's basketball went on the road to play the Georgia Bulldogs. They started hot, and although Georgia outscored them in the second half, they still won by 14, winning 78-64 on the road. They are now 5-0 in SEC play. Welcome back to Kernel at the Buzzer. This week we are joined by a very special guest, Phoenix Stevens, who covers UK women's basketball for Kentucky Sports Radio and also hosts KSR's UK women's basketball podcast, The Memorial Memo. Ladies and gentlemen, Phoenix Stevens.
Let's go. Happy to have you on here.
Yeah, appreciate you all having me on. Glad to, as a student, people don't realize I'm a student here at UK. Happen to be doing this with KSR. Very fortunate to be in the position I'm in, but glad you all brought me on. Colonel helping along with the student stuff, so
Dude,
to be on.
I can't lie to you. When I first saw you in class, I kind of stopped myself because I thought this dude was like 23.
I get that a lot.
You carry yourself great. You do great work. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast and, talk about both basketball teams. So,
yeah, I appreciate it. I tend to get like I'll go cover a game or something, and someone will be like, man, you're young in this business. What are you, like 23, 25, 28? I'm like, no, I'm 20. Like right on. I don't know what bourbon tastes like yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's always unique for people to see, but glad to be on. Very fortunate to be doing this in the position that I'm in.
So first off, we got to talk about this Alabama and Kentucky game. Now, very high-scoring game.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, again, this Kentucky team, it's evident they can put up points every single week.
Without fail.
Without fail. They do it every single game. But then, again, you're giving up, how much was it? 102. I know it's number 4 Alabama, but Bama comes in, completely ruins their home streak, completely ruins all that momentum they got back going after those 2 ranked wins. What are y'all's initial thoughts of this game, and how does UK really, not bounce back from it, because I don't necessarily think it was a bad loss, but how do they see this, learn from it, and then move forward?
Yeah, I agree that I don't necessarily think it was a bad loss for them. Alabama's an extremely talented team, extremely talented on the offensive side of the ball. And I think Kentucky played well to try and combat that. I was looking at some of their defensive stats earlier, and something that kind of surprised me on the outcome and how high scoring it was is that, Kentucky had more steals, blocks, fast break points, points in the paint, and less turnovers than Alabama, still gave up 102 points, and still lost. So I think it's tough when you play that well on defense and still allow 3 triple digits going in.
Again, it's that foul trouble, man. You had 4 Kentucky starters with 4 more fouls. 2 of them fouled out. And 29-16 in the free throw battle that will never win a game. It's almost just like Georgia, but in this game, it was just straight up. That was a foul. It wasn't anything questionable or ticky-tacky about it.
And Alabama's an interesting team because they're known for their high-octane scoring. They're known for, okay, we're going to shoot the 3. We're going to beat you by the 3. But they're also good in the way that, they're just not going to shoot any mid-range shots. And so if they're going to take a 2, It's going to be driving to the basket. It's going to be creating contact and getting your guys in foul trouble. Like you said, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who had 4 more fouls in that game. It's going to be very hard to kind of, for Mark Pope, for example, it's going to be hard to create a rotation, a consistent rotation to where, okay, who do I have in, who do I not, when basically you're kind of counting on your bench to really get you going.
And it's tough to execute a comeback, especially when you're fighting back in those last few minutes of the game, and then you lose people to fouling out, and it's hard when you're trying to make that comeback in an away upset win. You just can't have your guys getting in foul trouble like that early.
Right, and I mean, like Phoenix is saying, that three-point shooting is what Alabama lives by. Mark Sears hit a couple, but he was shooting bad. But then you still end the night with 24 points and 9 assists because he's out there playmaking. He's getting himself to the free throw line. He's taking volume shots. I think, like, going forward, Kentucky has to find a way to not foul. Like, I think it's going to be one of those things where, like, you're guarding James Harden in 2018, you hold your hand behind the back. Because it seems like I'm not going to pick on the refs. Like, I'm not going to sit here on the pod and be like, oh, the refs are causing Kentucky's downfall. But it's like you have to find a way as a coach to utilize, hey, when you see a guy driving like that hard, give him the layup and let's get in transition. Like, don't let him get this little scoop and one, get all their momentum back. Like, there's got to be a coaching point there, really.
And I think the main thing you got to take away from it, too, is I think when you think about Kentucky's defense, because that was obviously a big problem in this game. You allow 102 points, and you just have to wonder how many of the defensive issues are actually fixable. At what point does it just become, okay, we're just not the best, Kentucky is just not the best defensive team in the world. Now, I think, like Travis Perry, well, maybe not him as much, but there's some, like some of the guards. I think some of them tend to struggle with being able to stay in front of a guy when he's trying to drive to the hoop. But I think Kentucky's inside defense, maybe it can hold serve. I just think it's one of those things where you just have to sit and kind of think about it. And of course, there's no midweek game for Kentucky this week, so you sit there and you think about, you have some time to sit back and be like, okay, what can Kentucky do to fix this kind of defensive thing? It's just my thing is I don't know what is fixable for Kentucky.
That's a great point, and I think Mark Pope. I mean, there's speculation that he was like not coaching the team right, and it felt selfish out there. He comes after the game and saying, "I wanted them to be more selfish." I don't know what you're talking about. So I feel like he has complete confidence in the team. I feel like it's not really like he's not fixing things maybe. It's just more of like I don't want to call it an adjustment period, but it's still like you just play the number 4 team in the country. You only lost by 5. Like, really, if you play that game 10 times, it's probably split 5-5 in my opinion. I think that's a good testament. Like, hey, Kentucky will compete. They can play good basketball. It's just one of those things like, yeah, you lost mid-season. Sucks. Learn from it. I
think one thing that was clear for sure in that last game was that Kentucky was killed by the big man. Just absolutely killed. Yeah. Grant Nelson, I don't know.
Larry Bird action.
I don't know what they
Grant
put in
Nelson,
his cereal that morning. But, I mean, ridiculous. 25 points, 11 rebounds, 19 first-half points. Not to say that Mark Sears obviously didn't play great as well. 24 points, 9 assists, combined for 49 of Alabama's 102. Just the two of them right there.
Yeah, Grant Nelson's a monster. Been a monster. If you don't know about Grant Nelson, to be fair, he hasn't had the best of the season. I think he's not really.
Last year they were a little more aggressive.
Yeah, but I remember that North Carolina game tournament last year. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, like bro couldn't miss. I'm pretty sure he had 30, and it's just like
he's ridiculous.
He can come alive in those big games. So.
Well, and that's the thing too. You have to remember, and again, that's like you alluded to. You lost by 5 to the number 4 team in the country. There are much worse losses. Ohio State that you've had this season that you could have.
Absolutely.
It was just Alabama's day. Like Grant Nelson, pretty sure he's like a 25% three-point shooter.
Yeah.
And he started that game, and apparently he only went 2 of 7. Felt like that man went 7 of 7 to start the game. It's just one of those things where sometimes a team's going to get hot, and it's not a whole lot you can do about it.
And really, I mean, talk about the Ohio State loss. Like, it's almost favorable to Kentucky. Like, Ohio State's record's horrible, but they just beat Purdue at Purdue. they're competing in big games. It's almost like Butler out there. Like, they compete every night. They don't really win games, but it's almost like that win or that loss for Kentucky's almost starting to seem kind of like, whatever. Each week feels like such a new chapter. Like, for Kentucky basketball, it feels like they're always improving on something or doing something right, and then they have a loss like this where it's like, how do we feel? Like, I think the simple answer, it's the first year of the program, they're just not good enough yet. I don't think they have the weapons to compete.
I would probably disagree with that statement of them not being able to compete. I mean, it's clear that they can compete.
But I mean, like, they can't. I don't see them being in a tournament game against, like, an upper echelon team and being able to, like, win that Sweet 16 game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think there's a thing about this team where, I mean, Mark Pope had to go in the portal and bring in literally a whole new team, a whole new staff.
Right.
You know, this isn't a Mark Pope team you're going to see for the rest of his, you know, hopefully like decade-long career here at Kentucky, right? Like, Mark Pope, he kind of had to get what he could get in the portal. And that's not to say this team is bad, but I do agree with you where, you know, I think like Alabama, for example, I think Alabama and Auburn are kind of like your two teams in the SEC that they're just a little bit, maybe Tennessee too, just a little bit better than everybody else in the conference.
Tennessee are frauds.
Tennessee.
Tennessee, I don't think Tennessee's good. I think that's a team Kentucky can beat on the road.
I think Tennessee are frauds.
But still,
no, I like it.
It's a great point, though, because, like, you have Kentucky at Tennessee coming up. Oh, my gosh. Like, that's a crazy game.
Of course, yeah.
And just because it's at Tennessee, just because it's a rivalry, it makes Tennessee seem like such an upper echelon team. And they're probably going to go out there and perform because they're playing Kentucky.
But for a lot of these guys, this is their first experience at a big rival game at Kentucky. And
that's fair.
Being at, you know, obviously there are so many other schools that you can build rivalries at, and there are rivalries everywhere across the country. But when you just like boil in the SEC with all these teams that, you know, could equally be a rival, and having Tennessee be a historical rival, but also border war, and you know, the last few years have been very back and forth with the wins and losses of both programs, that I think that some of these guys could, you know, come out of the gate firing, and I think Tennessee might not be ready.
It's like Louisville. I mean, Lamont had a perfect shooting game and dropped 33. I don't think anyone was expecting that day. And again, alluding like back to Ohio State, that made Louisville look good, and now Louisville's ranked, and their program's back after how many wins last year?
I believe
5,
2.
7.
Kenny Payne won a total of 12 games at Louisville, and I thought it was awesome. Cat Pelsey, I said that backwards.
Yeah, you said Cat Pelsey. I was like, wait a minute.
It's Pat Kelsey. I tend to do that sometimes, but Pat Kelsey, I remember he got his like 13th win there this season. They're like, he's just passed Kenny Payne on the all-time wins list already.
Huh?
I didn't know Louisville was that bad. I was thinking they won at least like 8 games last year.
I believe our first year here, they were the worst Division I team in the country wins-wise.
Wow.
They were horrid.
But they're back.
They're back.
And it always feels like, to me, like despite being a student here, it always feels like Kentucky's like the team that will – boost you on purpose. It feels like when you play Kentucky, it's a Super Bowl. And
that's the thing.
But I think it's everybody's Super Bowl when they play Kentucky.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Every time a team comes here, it's like they're always on their
come out firing.
Their best game possible.
And that's one thing about this team. It's funny because we were just talking about how, like, maybe Kentucky isn't like an Auburn, Alabama. But I do think there's something about this team that you haven't seen in past years. You know, in past years, you've been relying on freshmen. That's kind of been the whole thing whenever John Calipari was here. But now, you know, with Mark Pope, and you have this experienced team. Like, perfect example of that Duke game in the Champions Classic. Kentucky doesn't win that game last year or any other year. You know, Duke loses. I mean, the kid had a great game, but Cooper Flagg, and at the end of that game, kind of faltered in that big moment.
Not kinda. Most definitely flundered in that moment.
Yeah, and
2 turnovers.
Exactly, and it's just like, well, there is a sense of like, you know, experienced teams like Kentucky has this season that may not be as talented as an Auburn, Alabama, but I do have a confidence, and I mean, clearly we saw it against Duke and against, you know, Louisville, where your experienced teams, sometimes that veteran edge that they have can kind of catapult you to a big win. So it's hard to gauge, really, because we're talking about, okay, they get in a tournament game and, you're down 5 against the 8th seed in the tournament. What are you going to do? But, I mean, there's a sense of, yes, Kentucky is not as talented as some of these other teams, but they also have an experience and, I mean, in my opinion, a great coach, to help them kind of get over the edge or get over the hump in those kind of games.
I like the point about the freshmen because I was looking back on that Oakland loss when I was looking at the guys in the league. They're kind of cooking up a little bit. And you're looking at Dillingham with 10 points, 2 for 9, and then Reed with 3 points, 1 for 5. It's like those were your offensive weapons last year, your main ones.
Those were your top 10 draft picks.
And what did Antonio Reeves have that game?
27 on 11 of 18 shooting.
There you go.
Yeah.
He was the most consistent because he had the experience and he had been there before. It was a first-round exit.
I promise I did not know that Antonio Reeves stat. I just figured that he did that.
Yeah,
of course.
So it's a great point. I mean, experience is what matters when it comes to March. That's why I feel like this team is built for that. But, again, alluding to the conversation, this is the first year. I know we've had conversations about the women's team too. It's the first year that's probably going to be the worst roster they build.
Exactly.
So –
yeah, I mean, it's enlightening for fans to see that.
It's a great future.
Yeah, to see, how terrified everybody around here was when we were, in between that period between coaches and everybody was leaving in the transfer portal. Everybody was leaving in the transfer portal. And all of our recruits were, never mind, they left. So I think it's nice to see.
Well, think about this too. How refreshing is it? Just talking about men's basketball, because I think about this with women's basketball all the time, but just strictly men's basketball. How refreshing is it to be complaining about a loss to number 4 Alabama by 5 when last year you were complaining about a loss to UNC Wilmington in December?
Absolutely. I mean, last year we were complaining about unranked losses, and this season only had to do that once.
Yeah.
Now, if they pull off another upset by Oakland in the 64, I mean, fans got it right?
At that point, it's not Cal.
Yeah.
I'll say that. If they go out in the first round or second round, at that point I'll say it's not Cal.
And I will say there's that fair criticism of Mark Pope that's well, you haven't done anything in the NCAA tournament in your whole career. Mm-hmm. And it'll be, I think whenever any coach comes to Kentucky, you're going to be elevated. You're going to have more resources. You're just going to have, better opportunity to be a better coach. And I think Mark Pope, I don't think there's any reason why he can't succeed and make runs in the NCAA tournament.
It's Duquesne or Oakland. Pick your poison. I mean, who do you want to be upset by this year? No, but like you said, you got to criticize them. You got to look into it. 2 crazy matchups coming up at Vanderbilt and at Tennessee. Vandy did beat Tennessee the other day. And, I mean, this team at 15-4, that's a very losable game. The joke going around is Vanderbilt's good now. They are good now.
It's not a joke.
They're good in football. They're good in basketball. They're competing. They're here. I love that sentence. They are here.
They are here.
And they're going to be at Vanderbilt, not at Rupp Arena, and that is going to be an atmosphere. I mean, Pope and all them are going to have to adjust to quickly. They're going to have to make sure they're on their A game because that is a losable game.
It'll be interesting to see because that Vanderbilt game at Vandy has always historically just been Kentucky South. We're okay, everyone, I'm from the western part of the state, so I can speak. When you're from western Kentucky and Kentucky's going to play in Nashville, it's okay, let's go to Nashville. Let's have a party for a night, and it'll be interesting to see how many Vandy, what's the turnout? What's the Kentucky to Vanderbilt fan ratio in that arena? If it's anything like it was in women's basketball earlier this season, there'll be actually a lot of Vanderbilt fans there, a good contingent of UK fans too, but it won't just be, Kentucky having a home game in an away arena.
Yeah, and then Tennessee, I mean, we kind of touched on them a little bit too. They bounced back with a big win over Mississippi State. I mean, beat them pretty handedly. And it's even though you lost to Vandy, I mean, you still just beat the number 14 team, pretty well. So, I mean, Kentucky, I'm not going to sit here and be they have to win, but they definitely got to get one of these 2 next road games. They definitely got to compete. They cannot get blown out by one of these teams or made look like frauds. You got to hold on to that top 10 spot. You got to make sure you're taken seriously. You're not going to win every game.
No,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
impossible. And, I mean, we've seen it, not even a handful of times in history. No one will ever go undefeated. Losses happen. They'll definitely happen on a random Sunday when you're playing against whoever. So I think Kentucky has to get one of these games.
Well, here in the NIL era, it's interesting because you're seeing it in football too, where there's just so much more parity. Like, it's anyone can be anyone on any given night. It's not like in basketball. It's not just Kentucky winning the SEC every single year like it used to be. Kentucky hasn't won the SEC outright since, I think, 2018.
The SEC has never been more dynamic than it is right now in basketball.
Exactly.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it goes to show. And to be fair, that's also credit to the schools just hiring the right guys. I mean,
For
Chris
sure.
Beard at Ole Miss, Nate Oates at Alabama. I think Todd Golden at Florida is going to do some special stuff. But, well, I guess we'll see how long Todd Golden's down
Yeah.
there, depending on some stuff.
there it
We'll
is.
see.
But just outside of that, I mean, there's some really good coaches in the SEC, but there's also this part of NIL where it's like, okay, you're not just going to Kentucky to go win a championship. Like, well, now you can go here and earn $1 million or however much money it may be to go play at a different school, and that creates more parity. And you're seeing where anyone can beat anyone on any given night.
Yeah, and even like with Boogie Flan, I mean, he was going to be here, and Cal goes, and then he's right into Arkansas. You're going to have those coach changes. You're going to have the players follow the coach. You're going to have the recruiting build up. Arkansas is going to very easily become a weapon. Like, this is Cal's first year, too. Even though Arkansas is god-awful, they're still going to come in here, probably, pull off an upset. I think it's still going to happen.
I mean, hey.
And
Never speak that into existence again.
I won't, but I'm just saying I think it's a very likelihood. Like, that's Cal's Super Bowl again.
Oh, for
I will
And-
say, I think it's a lot less likely because it just happened where Boogie Flan
Yeah,
is
I
now
know,
out
he's
for the year. I mean,
hurt.
he's their
Oh
best
my
player, and he's now
gosh.
out for the year. I hate that for the kid, but
I hate that for the rivalry, too. To
Yeah.
be so honest with you, I was hoping that we would
Boogie
see the best
Lamont,
Arkansas
oh
team
my
coming into
gosh.
Rupp Arena in February.
it doesn't matter because it's still Cal and it's still him.
Of course.
But could you imagine how much more electric that game would have been if, they come into this game kind of like Kentucky, 2, 3, 4 losses, 5 losses instead of,
Yeah.
0-5 now in the SEC?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does suck. Boogie's out. I know he's averaging a plethora of points.
Yeah.
Young as crap. He's going to be back. I think. I don't know if he'll league it after getting hurt for a year.
It's
It's
interesting
going to
with Boogie.
be it's like a Shaden Sharp type deal.
Yeah, I was about to
Well,
say,
because
little
Boogie is so
shade
good
sharp.
that he should be a one and done. But I guess there is that question of the NBA, like, okay, like, we didn't see you do a whole lot in college, but like you were already saying, you didn't see anything from Shaden Sharp in
you didn't
college.
see a
So I
ball
could
hit
see
the floor.
Boogie still being a one and done kid for sure.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that I was noticing as we started SEC play. And it's mainly that I think it's very obvious that Jackson Robinson's performances heavily influence Kentucky's win or loss in big SEC games. And it's clear. So, we run back through some of their stats. In that loss against Alabama, 11 points, 1 rebound, 0 assists, 4 for 10, 3 for 7 from 3. And the wins against Texas A&M, 22 points, 27 points, 8 for 17, 9 for 12, 5 for 13 from 3, 7 for 10 from 3. The loss to Georgia, 5 points, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 for 5 from field goal, 1 for 5 from 3. Win against Florida, not as much of a great game, but still solid. 14 points, a rebound, 2 assists, still 5 for 12 from the field goal, only 2 for 6 from 3. But I think that the energy that Robinson brings coming off the bench, whether it's a home game or an away game, just immediately brings the team's vibe straight up. I think they play harder. I think they play faster, and I think they're more energized, especially when at home. When in Rupp Arena, Jackson Robinson hits back-to-back threes, and that crowd is erupting. And so I think as we continue to see how they play out in the SEC games, I think Jackson Robinson's performances are going to be huge.
Yeah, and coming into the season, he was projected like one of the player of the years on the watch list and everything, and it's like that was expected to be Kentucky's guy. He'd been with Pope before. And even at BYU, I felt like he was very balanced. Like, he was a scorer, but it felt like he would give you like a 15, 6, and 6 nightly, and you were like, hey, that's a great game from him. But now it seems like he's not doing the playmaking, doesn't really have to get in there for those rebounds. He's the shooter, and he's the offensive like powerhouse that needs to have a good game, needs to shoot well from three. He's not getting his shots, like you said. Like,
I also think he needs to shoot more, though.
Yeah, I think that's what Mark Pope's even like alluding to, like them not being selfish. Because frankly, if J-Rob is being selfish, he would be
putting
shooting
up 15, 23s a game, and he's hitting a few at least.
Yeah,
you know?
like if he was being selfish, he would be taking those shots. How many shots did he take against the last game?
He took 10 shots against Alabama.
10 shots compared to 18 when he had over 20, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can see clear difference.
Maybe not the most efficient scorer in the world, but I do
to say the least.
But I do think there's a thing with Jackson where, I think, kind of right behind us here, I think Amari Williams is kind of your emotional catalyst for the team. Like, I hate to say it, but it's like, you can kind of read on his face how Amari's feeling. But I think there's kind of that same sense with Jackson where, I think you made a great point talking about Jackson, where really this Duke game I'm looking at where he had 1 point. Of course, Kentucky obviously beat Duke. It's kind of like the only outlier.
That's what when I was going through the stats yesterday, I noticed I started at the beginning of the season. I saw that Duke game, and I was like, well, maybe I can't start here. But then I looked at the rest of the SEC games, and I noticed it started to hit.
But I also think that Duke game was just so weird because of the whole Cooper flag. That was a very weird game.
It was so early in the season.
It was.
Too.
It was so early, and it was like the Seattle battle in Seattle or whatever.
Champions Classic. That was the Champions Classic.
Oh, you're right.
Battle in Seattle would have been Gonzaga.
That was Gonzaga. Yeah.
But my point in saying that is, it does feel like however Jackson Robinson performs is almost a good indicator of like, okay, what's Kentucky going to do this game? Like, is Kentucky going to beat Alabama or are they going to lose to Alabama? And I think 11 points it's not bad. It's not anything horrible.
No, it's fine.
But it's also coming into the season, Jackson Robinson is supposed to be your best player. Mm-hmm. He's supposed to be the guy, the guy he played for Mark Pope. He already knows the system. I mean, he's about as much as Kobe Brea does, gets the ball on the perimeter. Is like, all right, man, you have the green light. Shoot whenever you want.
Absolutely.
And it's just whenever, if Jackson's not hitting shots, it's just hard to see Kentucky winning basketball games.
So really enough about college basketball for now. Let's talk about the guys that are in the pros making an impact. Number one, everyone loves Reed Sheppard. 49 points the other night. This dude has been killing it in the G League for the Vipers, the Rockets G League team. 30 points and 8 assists right now, average for 3 games. That's unreal. Y'all know his splits right now? 46.3, 40.5, and 100% from the free throw line.
Wow.
Bro is a bucket.
And not to mention, he's everywhere. He's not just putting up shots. He's averaging 3 steals a game nearly in the G League.
Yeah, and again, G League, people want to make fun of it. Like, everyone goes off in the G League. Isn't your number 3 pick in the draft? And, I mean, I know he's underwhelming so far in the NBA, like averaged like 3 points and shooting like 35 from the field. I know that's not good at all. But seeing Reed develop, seeing he's so capable of putting up a game like that, it's got to be like really hopeful for the Rockets. And at the same time, it kind of makes the pick seem like, oh, hey, they were kind of right about him. Like, he's just adjusting. I know as a Rockets fan, I don't want to be biased, but like, I see him coming to the game. He acts like he plays at Kentucky. And it's like he is poking them steals away. He's chucking threes. And when he's hitting, dude, it's like you can't believe he's a real human sometimes. Mm-hmm. Like, he does not look how he plays. He doesn't look how he plays. Like, you would think he's just like
have like a 40-inch vertical.
Yeah, it's insane,
like it's
bro.
Yeah, I think he had the highest NBA draft vertical. But the thing about Reed,
it's crazy.
He sets himself apart with how hard he plays. And I think another thing that's worthy to note, when he got drafted by the Rockets, well, they had the number 3 pick. The Rockets were just very bad last year.
Yeah.
He comes into a Rockets team this year. What are the Rockets' second team in the West right now?
Yeah.
I mean, they're
unexpectedly much better than they thought they would be.
And they're very guard heavy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They don't need guards.
There are a ton of really good guards in that team. So Reed's kind of in a position where he's playing behind all of these tremendous guards. And I think it's like I said, it's easy to make fun of the guy because, you're the number 3 pick, now you're in the G League. Well, now he's in the G League. You can see what he does against guys that he's better in, putting up 50 points or 40 points, whatever it is.
And he didn't last too long down there. They pulled him back up real fast.
Yeah.
I don't is he back on the how does that work?
So it depending on your contract, if you're a two-way player, you have a certain amount of games that you have to play in the G League.
Makes sense.
And then you usually ride the bench for the rest of them and travel with the NBA team. But I think in situations where you have a player who's lower rotation on your bench, you can send them down to the G League if they're coming back from an injury, if they're not playing too hot, just trying to get better. And then, if you put up 38 and 5 and 3 steals a game, they're going to pull you right back up and say, all right, yep, we were right. We were
very
right.
Similar to Rob, because I know Rob played 2 games down in the G League, had himself, wasn't crazy, but he's playing good. They pulled him back up. Other night against the Grizzlies, 15 points in 17 minutes. I mean, that's special. And that's great. And since he's been back, he's averaging 12 points on 60% shooting. It's very efficient. I know when he was in the G League playing his games, he was shooting 8% from 3.
Yeah.
And it's I see why you're in the G League. You got to find your shot, bro.
I think something that was noticed, I've noticed so far with him and being on the Timberwolves, is that I think Anthony Edwards has pulled him under his wing, and I think it's clear. You see it a lot in post-game interviews. You see it a lot outside of that, but
that's scary.
Yeah, and if you're having Anthony Edwards as your mentor at 20-something, I think he's only 20 years old, and that's awesome. And I think that regardless of whether they need Rob Dillingham to be that guy right now as a backup guard, that you have probably the best shooting guard in the league, taking him under his wing and just teaching him everything he knows.
And I know on draft day, I'm pretty sure the Spurs drafted him, and then he got traded to the Timberwolves. And then the Timberwolves went on to draft Terrence Shannon, too. Oh, my God, the Timberwolves just got probably the 2 best guards in college on the same team. So, yeah, they're young, but, alluding to your point, Ant's leading them. Terrence Shannon's going crazy in the G League, too. When they all get going and hopefully stay together on the Timberwolves, oh my gosh, that guard play is insane.
Didn't mean to cut you off, but I think Rob, I think the good thing about him, you think about that Kentucky team last year, and you look at that team and you're okay, you look at the roster and who is the player on this team that's probably has the most potential to flourish in the NBA? And obviously probably ended up being Reed, but I think just looking at it before the year started, you probably thought it was Rob. You probably looked at him and you're Shifty.
Either that or DJ Wagner.
Well, DJ is an interesting one because he kind of fizzled out. And
he did. He fizzled out a little bit in that freshman year that everyone thought he was going to be a first-round draft pick.
I remember because I used to cover men's basketball as well when I worked for a smaller outlet, and I remember looking at that 23 class that DJ was in, and I was like, that dude's a star. I thought he was going to be it. And I still think if he played under a different coach, probably could be a star.
Probably.
I just don't think he's used right.
I think some change wouldn't be horrible.
You see them on our screen, Reed and Rob, they came off the bench. And we don't need to get into this whole thing because I think, KSR does enough of it where we talk about.
It's a tangent, man. It's a tangent.
But
it's definitely a tangent.
That seems to be a stigma that people have with us. I guess I can't say they're too wrong, but at the same time, these guys were 2 of the best shooters in college basketball, and they came off the bench at Kentucky. They were top 10 picks, came off the bench at Kentucky. It just seems ridiculous to me, but that's besides the point.
And then looking at their teammate Antonio Reeves doing his thing for the Pelicans.
Absolutely.
I did not know, this speaks to my ball knowledge, I did not know that they were called the Birmingham Squadron. I thought it was quite interesting.
I did not either until I checked the G League Stats website, and I was, who does Tony Reeves play for? The Birmingham Squadron?
I'm not going to lie. You all brought up, the Vipers and now these guys?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can name you any other G League team.
Yeah, the Rio Grande Valley Vipers. That's the Rockets G League team.
I know there's the Indiana Mad Ants.
Yes,
I know that because of 2K.
Because of Oscar.
I know that because of 2K.
Yes,
because you went
2K.
down in 18 or something.
Yeah.
And
a lot of the teams, though, it's just the same. Iowa Wolves. The Celtics G League team used to be called the Red Claws or something, Maine Red Claws, but now they're just
we gotta change
Celtics.
these names, man, please.
I know.
Can we just call them the T-Wolves G League team?
Well, now the Celtics are just the Maine Celtics instead of the Maine Red Claws.
Oh, yeah.
So.
But, yeah, Antonio Reeves on that horrid team name, averaging 25 points in 5 games. That's still special.
Yeah,
G League or
sure.
not, that's special. And
also 4 steals.
Yeah. And not like Reed or Rob. He's not that top 10 pick. I mean, he went 47 in the draft, still giving you production.
But he was one of the more consistent players on the Kentucky team that season.
Yeah.
Right before he got drafted.
Yes and no. Like, I mean, he had some horrid shooting games. Oh, my gosh. I
As
remember
one does.
2 years ago, I don't remember who they got eliminated by, but he shot like 1 for 11
Kansas
from 3. Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
That Kansas State game was ugly.
I was just like, dude, like,
Marquise
please get off the
Noel
court.
absolutely
Stop.
tore
Like,
Kentucky
stop
up.
shooting.
Well, this is what I don't get about NBA teams. It's like everyone wants to draft the superstar freshman. I mean, I get it. They're young. But Antonio Reeves, I feel like, is your prototypical guy you see on NBA teams nowadays. Yes, he's older than most guys coming into the league, but he's also just like, I'm going to stand behind the three-point line. I'm going to make shots. Like, as defense, I don't know. But there's a lot of guys in the NBA that have I don't know kind of defense.
Yeah, of course.
Antonio Reeves, it just feels like he's such a tremendous shooter. I mean, he was one of the best in college basketball last season. And it just feels like it just doesn't make sense. Like you talk about how he's the 47th pick. I feel like he could have been a first-rounder. Like, why did he fall so far? That's just because he's old. It's because he's, what was he, a fifth year at last year at Kentucky, a fifth-year senior? Like, just because he's old, you don't want to draft him? Like, it's not like he's 30. He's 24.
That's how I felt about.
Speaking of old, Shibwe. That's how I felt with Oscar.
And he's more prominent than anybody right now of the young Kentucky
he's
stars.
Leading the G League right now, rebounds per game, 17 rebounds per game.
He won MVP, right?
Yeah.
2 years ago?
I think so.
Or last season?
Yeah. But he right now he's putting up 14, 17, 2 assists, a steal, and a block per game in the G League. I think he was the last late second round.
I can't remember, honestly.
I don't know. Undrafted, actually. I believe he was undrafted.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Because Chris Livingston went last or something like that to the Bucks. Maybe I'm talking crazy. But
he was on the Bucks.
But I think Shibwe went undrafted, signed with Salt Lake City,
Yeah, he was undrafted.
Yeah. And I think it's because he was 25 that year, his senior year, which, he's got 5 years on Reed Sheppard
Well, and I'll
going
say about
into the
Oscar,
league.
too. Oscar, and I'll say this about someone else here in a second. I was just talking about how Antonio feels like your prototypical guy for the NBA. Oscar's kind of the exact opposite. Like Oscar
can't shoot.
He's just
No,
sits,
he cannot shoot.
He doesn't shoot the three. He just sits in the paint and rebounds. Like, dude, you'd have been good in the NBA 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's kind of proven us wrong in that he's doing well in the G League. And I'm bringing this up because how in the world is Zach Edey good in the NBA? Like, that guy. I mean, is he going to win Rookie of the Year?
I was a Zach
It's
Edey,
tough,
I was
maybe.
promoting him. I knew he'd be good.
Which is
Just
insane because
Grizzlies-
what in the world does he do?
Well, it's the
It's
Grizzlies
because he
style
has
of
John
play.
Morant and Yuki, and they just they play the small guard, huge center, like Wemby and CP3, just.
Well, at least with Wemby, he's like a generational athlete. And
This is true.
This guy
This
is
is true.
7'4" and can shoot from 40 feet deep.
This is very true.
Zach Edey, I don't know if he's shot a jumper past the free throw line in his whole career.
Ooh, don't
like that
recall.
guy,
He hit
actually he hit a
threes.
three at
He
Purdue.
hits threes now, though.
He did it at 3 at Purdue.
But it's just like I don't understand. I mean, because I remember when he was drafted, I think it was the 9th pick. I think he went after Rob.
It was a high.
And it was like, Grizzlies, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah, it
that's
kinda
such
felt that way.
Such a stupid draft pick.
I
It's
thought
like, well,
it was-
I guess we're stupid because we thought it was stupid.
Well, here's the thing, though. Ja goes in and throws up a flaily layup. Edey cleans it up, boom, put back.
That's
Yeah.
true.
He's had multiple double-doubles this year. He's killing it. But back to the
Angel Reese
Kentucky
of the
guys. Whoa.
I mean,
No, I'm
stay in the
kidding.
paint,
No,
layups.
That's fair.
Someone's got to do it.
I mean, ending this thing, though, about the Kentucky players in the league, I think is really great to see. It just
too.
adds on to the plethora of guys. One thing to note before we move on to women's basketball, this is the last Cal class from Kentucky in the NBA. From here on out, every Kentucky player that comes to the NBA is Mark Pope's kid.
Mhm.
And I think when we get that decade down the line, it's going to be really fun to compare and see,
For sure.
hey, did Pope have better guys in the NBA
I
or
don't
not?
think anything will quite compare
Cal
to
has
Cal's run of NBA
tremendous
players.
run.
I know. I'm
I
just
mean,
saying it's something we could talk about.
It's like
maybe in the
something like
future.
28 right now. Kentucky
It might-
players in the pros.
Well, I mean, there's that stat where it's like what, like $5 billion worth of contracts. I mean,
something
Cal.
insane.
I mean, if there's one thing you can say about Cal, he is probably the greatest at making kids, or I don't know if he is anymore, but at least was in his time at Kentucky, the greatest that there ever has been when it comes to, all right, I'm going to put you in the pros. And I'm going to make
I'm going to take you from high school and you're going to be in the NBA next season.
I mean, think about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, who, I mean, that guy was a backup to Quade A. Green when he got to Kentucky, and now he's going to win the NBA MVP most likely. It's insane.
He was even backup on the Clippers to Lou Williams when he came into the league.
And that's not to say like Cal, like obviously Cal doesn't get all the credit for that, but he should get some, like
for sure.
I mean, and again, we like to crap on Cal because it's fun, but at the same time, he's done a tremendous job of putting players in the NBA, and I get it. We want you to win games at Kentucky, and he won a championship and everything, but at the same time,
won championship.
He did won one championship, but at the same time, I'm just saying, like, Cal guys in the NBA, I don't know if Pope will ever get there. And but to be quite frank, I don't know if anybody in the history of college basketball for a very long time will get to that point where Cal was at.
Back again for the second week in a row. We will be playing Name That Player, but since AJ isn't here, it will be a one-on-one matchup with our host, Kai, facing off against our guest for this week's episode, Phoenix. So there will be 5 players, active, men's or women's, Kentucky basketball players that are going to have extremely zoomed in little screenshots, a random part of their body or jersey or whatever.
Okay.
And you are going to have to guess. There will be no indication on whether it's a men's or women's player, most likely, unless, you see a beard or something like that or a mustache, But first, there's 5, so it'll be the first person to 3 will win.
Okay. Let's roll. Let's
Everybody
get it.
good here? All right.
Yeah.
First one.
Kobe Bryant.
Antonio Reeves.
No. Current Kentucky.
Oh, current.
Current.
Lamont Butler.
No.
I have no idea.
There's 3 dudes on the team with a.
Is that Ortega?
I just don't pay attention.
It's
to
Ortega.
that.
Ortega.
It's Ortega.
Bang.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bang.
There are 2 dudes on the team.
Easy.
That's the picture.
See, I knew that. I was just.
Well, see, so you weren't locked in.
Yeah.
This one, I think that's 2 men's, 4 women's. Figured I'd tailor it a little more towards the women's side for both of y'all.
Yeah.
So that's next one here.
That's another pass it.
He beat me to it. Yeah.
He beat you to it. Yeah.
I may not struggle when it comes to the women's side.
Yeah, I figure you guys will have that one for sure. All right.
Georgia Moore.
Deja Lawrence.
No, this
This is men.
This is
Ooh.
men's.
This
See,
is
Deja's
women's,
been
you
a lot,
said?
so I could have figured that would be.
Oh, this is
her.
men's?
This is a men's.
Dude, his nails are long.
Kobe Bryant.
That's Kobe Bryant.
Look at that.
Dude, his nails are long.
You
I thought
gotta
it was
think, man. Who's out here doing the 3? It's
There's
Kobe
only
Bryant.
there's only one dude on the
That
team
man's
who's
always
throwing
dialed
that
in.
up. Yeah.
I thought Georgia was hitting him with it.
All right.
Georgia.
That's Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're really losing on here, Kai. You already lost.
I'm
but
slow, bro.
That's all right. All right. We'll do the last one for fun here.
For fun.
For fun.
Oh boy. That's long hair.
Gabby Brooks.
No, not Gabby Brooks.
Clara Silva.
It's Clara Silva.
Yeah.
Wow. That was a really impressive
Dang.
performance there from
There we
Phoenix.
go.
Wow. That's a clean sweep.
I didn't realize Clara's hair was that long, but I was also
I
trying
know.
to sit there and think no one else has. I don't think anyone else has black hair like her.
No,
I was thinking
but her
Gabby
hair
maybe,
is so
but-
long because she also braids it. Like when she has her
Yeah,
hair
that's
down,
true,
it goes
yeah.
like all the way down to her head.
I just didn't really think about her hair being like
Yeah.
that. But hey, what
6
a guess.
man of the year
Hey.
right there.
Phoenix takes it 4-1. I'm 0-2 now.
0-2.
in games.
Kai's 0-2 in
Yeah,
my
it's-
mini games.
It's fun. It's fun.
Oh man.
So not only are the men succeeding here at Kentucky, the women are as well. Arguably better, 16-1 right
I
now,
don't know if it's too
undefeated.
arguable.
Undefeated in the SEC right now, currently second in the entire SEC. It's amazing to say for this team who just won 12 games last year. Just recently beating Georgia 78-64 on the road. Is a big time win. Not really anything like I don't think anyone was expecting Georgia to win, but it's amazing to keep that streak alive, keep the confidence going. We got a very textbook, like we saw earlier in the season, a Georgia-Clara game where they both had 20 points. They both get their double-double, and team gets a win. However, I know you were very adamant about finishing the game right. What can you say about that?
You get out to a 23-4 lead to end the first quarter, and it looks like you're going to beat them 85-40. And now my thing is, coming into the season, I don't think anybody expected Kentucky to be where they're at right now.
No.
To be as good as they are right now. But at the same time, this isn't the Kentucky of old. This is Kenny Brooks' Kentucky team. You're not, and he says it all the time where he's like, okay, I'm not here to, he's like, I have my own standard. I won 20 games and 30 games and went to the Final Four at Virginia Tech. I have my own standard. And, he doesn't say it, but it's a higher standard than what we've seen at Kentucky, really ever. And the thing is just, if you want Kenny to, if you want this Kentucky team to kind of reach that standard, that they're being that championship standard, I think one of the main things is you have to play 40 minutes of basketball, man. You can't play 10, 15 minutes and coast against. Now, like you think about South Carolina, who just beat Oklahoma, a top 15 team, by 40 points, right? They lost to UCLA earlier in the season, and UCLA's still undefeated. I bet if you replay that game, South Carolina probably wins by 20 points. It's, if you want to be like South Carolina, if you want to be a championship team, you just got to bury teams. Yes, you beat Georgia by 14 on the road. Double-digit road win in the SEC is always a good thing. But when you're trying to take that next step, and again, that's an incredible thing to be talking about here in year one under Kenny Brooks. But if you want to take that next step and really be like, okay, do we want to, are we going to be top tier in the SEC, or are we going to be kind of a little bit below? One of the main things, in my opinion, that you have to do is you have to be able to beat teams and beat them good.
Yeah, and Georgia outscoring, Kentucky 43-34 in that second half, like you said. Can't finish games like that, no matter how big the lead is. Watching that first quarter, I thought it was going to be like 80-20.
Right.
I thought it was going to be horrible. I don't really think it was like a breakdown problem. I think they just kind of let up.
I do think that they also kind of let up. I think they saw that they didn't need to keep their foot on the gas that hard, and they just, kept a manageable lead, kept it safe, kept them in it, got the win.
Well, Kenny almost. He didn't necessarily admit that, but he kind of did post-game. And he had a radio show, post-game press conferences, and I'm pretty sure in both of those he had another press conference on Tuesday. And, all three times he was like, he's like, I need to be better at making sure we don't let up. And, and that's like I'm saying, I think almost verbatim, that's kind of what they did. They got out to that massive, massive lead, and all right, let's just get out of here at the win, move on.
And, that's safe. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But, again, that coaching style does not work against big teams. And I know Kenny's smart.
You try to do that against, let's say, God forbid, somehow just talking nonsense now. Let's say you get out to that kind of lead against South Carolina on the road. That's not going to happen. But if you did, you can't let up for three quarters after you get up on them. The NCAA tournament, where every game is you live and die by each and every game. You can't let up for three quarters or a whole second half against any team you play.
Because your conditioning won't be there when you have to play 40 minutes against a big team. So, yeah, all great points. I think, how you're kind of talking, Kenny knows that. It's not like it's it's not like a thing where it's going to be they're not used to playing this long. I think that when they have these big games coming up against Alabama at home, it's going to be a game where you have to play all 40 minutes. That's going to be really their first true test.
And I will say, too, there's a main difference between Kentucky and South Carolina, where South Carolina is probably the deepest team in college basketball. They brought back a lot of their minutes from last season, but they can kind of do that to where it's okay, we have a bench we can throw in. Kentucky doesn't really have that. They run all five starters. I think Kentucky and Notre Dame, and I think there's one other team, 90% of their production is their starters. 90% of their minutes is the starters.
They haven't even switched up that starting lineup all season. These five have started the game every single time.
Right.
And, you get Cassidy in there and Sanaya, and, yeah, they bring energy, but, do they bring 20 points? No. It's not even close.
Sure, you're bringing in a dog to bark at somebody off the bench, but,
Well, and my point was going to be, if you're going to make an argument for, okay, Kentucky coasted, maybe it's not the worst thing. The argument for that is, well, like Louisville game, all these other games where they've had to play, all out for 40 minutes, even
Plus.
40 minutes plus.
What happens when Georgia gets hurt or is tired?
Exactly. There's an argument to be made there where, again, I can kind of see where there's an argument to be made where it's like, okay, when you get out to a big lead, maybe coast because you're going to need to be, healthy, or you're going to be, less fatigued for another big-time game coming up.
And I think that's why the media and everyone surrounding the sport right now is kind of like pushing Jordan Obie to really try and come back. Kenny gave that good update. It sounded like better than we're being careful. It kind of sounded like, he said it's tempting to throw her in the lineup right now. That's good bench production that you need going into the tournament.
Well, the thing about Jordan is that she, her and Dom both, but Dom's out for the year. She's not coming back this year. But the thing with Jordan is that she was probably going to. She was going to start this season, and Kenny did provide an update, but he did also, while he did say it's very tempting to throw Jordan Obie in, he made sure to point out we're not going to rush it at all. We're not going to rush her.
They don't necessarily need her right now.
That's my thing too. I sit there and I think, and on our podcast, the More Memo, we talked about, okay, do you throw her in because, A, you want to save her eligibility for next season when Kentucky could be or will be better.
Yeah.
But also, if you throw her in right now when you're, she wouldn't come back immediately, but you come back and let's say you're 20-1, 19-1, 21-1, somewhere in that range. Well, at what point do you throw her in and now you're just – because they've had to learn how to play without her.
They clearly know how to do that.
Exactly. They've already made the adjustments to learn how to play without her. So what point does throwing her in just kind of throw a wrinkle in the rhythm of your team and its identity and really how you do things? Could that mess you up?
I think it has to be a supernatural comeback. I think it has to, I think she has to slowly work back into practices and slowly back into lifting and slowly back into team activities and getting more integrated with the team. And then maybe by Texas or Georgia later in the season, start to get her in the rotation, get some good minutes in before LSU and Tennessee and South Carolina. So then by the end of the season, sure, you may be able to pull off an upset, but at least you have a healthy and confident Jordan Obie instead of maybe I'm going to get injured again because I'm being rushed into the lineup that they don't quite need me in.
Right. Yeah, they're going to do everything that's necessary, right? But I also kind of go off of what Phoenix said. ST and Cassidy will score buckets here and there. I know Sanaya had a good 3-point outing a couple times, but it's just one of those things where I know we haven't seen Jordan yet, but I feel like she's very similar to a handling Deja Lawrence. I feel like she can handle the ball well, and she can also bang in a couple threes. That's big offense off the bench, and
she's essentially a bigger Deja Lawrence who can kind of rebound. If you took a Deja Lawrence's shooting and everything about Amelia Hassett as a rebounder, defender, that's kind of Jordan Obie.
And that's a great player right there.
Yeah, and that's why everyone's adamant about her coming back. But again, I think the biggest point I think she's healthy. I think she's fine.
You think?
I think she is because, just the way they're talking, I think it's almost a case where they're considering the whole next year thing because it's hey, I don't really think we're going to win a natty this year just because you insert yourself in a team. Let's win it next year when we have the number 8 girl coming in and you can be a starter alongside her.
And that's what I was going to say, too. I think the only case where you bring Jordan Obie back this season, I don't care if she's 100% healthy. The only case, in my opinion, where you bring Jordan Obie back this season is, do we really think we can make the Final Four this year? Do we really, really in our heart of hearts think we can make the Final Four?
If you win the SEC championship, sure. Let's go all out.
If you're 25-1 going into the last few games of the season, sure, why not? You know what I mean?
I think I'm with you all.
Yeah.
If you in the regular season with 3 losses and you win the SEC tournament or at least you make it to the finals or something, and you go into the NCAA tournament as a 1, 2, or 1 or a 2, sure.
You might be damn, we might have something here, and they might be able to do something with it.
But I would also say, if you get that far without her, why throw her in now? Because I think about next year's team is going to be better. You lose Georgia and Deja, But at the same time, you're bringing everyone else back. And you bring in Kaylin Carroll, who is a phenomenal freshman. And, I think my thing, and it just seems pretty obvious at this point, you're going to have to go get a point guard from the portal.
Of course.
And, that's going to be another tremendous player. And the thing about Jordan Obi, she's kind of a portal player in herself. Like, she hasn't played. Like, she's basically another portal get for Kenny Brooks this coming off season.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, we touched on it earlier. It's just, very similar to Mark Pope. You can very well argue, despite having Claire and Georgia, probably one of the best duos in the SEC right now, you're going to lose Georgia and Deja next year, but regardless, I think this is one of the worst teams Kenny will ever have at Kentucky.
Which is absolutely
it's
insane.
Crazy
it's crazy to think about. Yeah.
Because second in SEC right now.
Yeah.
No one was expecting them to be 16-1 to start the year.
Right.
So, I just think it's a testament to, Jordan even not rushing anything. It's going to show next year when I think she does come back next year and they have that crazy team.
Yeah, I think rolling off that, I got a few questions that you guys can take turns answering if you would like. First one I got is real simple. How far will they go before their first SEC loss? And why?
I think it'll be at Oklahoma on February 2nd. And, that Alabama game on January 30th, that'll be a very competitive game. Alabama, they're a ranked team. They are very, very good. But that game is at home for Kentucky, and I think that's ultimately the edge for Kentucky in that game. But playing at Oklahoma, Oklahoma, they lost by 40 to South Carolina. That's not who they are. They're better than that.
They're still a top 15 team.
I'm going to have to agree with Phoenix. I think that's exactly what I would say. All that makes me think about, though, is, let me think, they would be 20-2 at that point.
Yeah.
And, what?
If you get to that point, you get to where you're 20-1 before you lose.
9-1 in the SEC, that's great.
That's great.
I do think, though, that just kind of spoils everything going forward if you lose that Oklahoma game, because it shows how big the jump is to South Carolina, LSU, Texas, all these teams you have coming up in February. It kind of previews that Kentucky's not there yet, and I don't want them to lose that Oklahoma game because that just proves everything. Sure, they could beat Texas at Kentucky. Sure, maybe they could pull off the craziest upset in women's basketball history and win at South Carolina. Anything's possible in basketball.
We'll see about that. But
I think that Oklahoma game just kind of previews everything. If you lose that one, it's you're not there yet.
I think the thing about February, because there's a stretch from February 2nd to March 2nd, and I'll just read off real quick the games.
It's crazy.
At Oklahoma, at Ole Miss, versus Texas at home, Georgia at home, at Missouri. Those two games, I think you have to win those two.
Mm-hmm.
No.
There is
I think they can.
There is no situation in which you can afford to lose those two games.
I don't think they can lose an unranked game. For
exactly.
If they do, it's over.
I think Georgia and Mizzou are bad, though.
And then you end the year LSU at home, Tennessee at home, and at South Carolina. I think if you can manage to go 500 in February, that is a success.
Absolutely.
If you go, let's assume Kentucky wins those next three games, and you go into SEC play, or you go into February undefeated in SEC play.
I think
that's only 4 losses in conference play.
I think the only probable ones, you could even dash as a maybe, is the home games. I think the road ones are just kind of chalks.
Well, and I will say,
I don't think there's a chance.
Ole Miss, I don't think they're that good this year. I think they're a little overrated to start the year. I think Ole Miss is one Kentucky can steal.
I feel like Ole Miss is just a one-trick pony. I think they have their one player, and that's it.
Yeah, Ole Miss is so interesting because
Madison Scott, right?
Yeah, it's they should be better than they are.
They were ranked start of the year.
They played USC to start the year. It was like a 2-3 point game. And
Mm-hmm.
USC, I thought, was the best team coming into the in the country coming into the year.
They held Juju to a bad game. That's impressive.
You look at that as an opponent, or especially as a voter for the top 25.
Yeah.
You'd be like, yeah, okay.
They beat Louisville by 20 in a preseason exhibition. Now, to be fair, those do not always mean any. Sometimes those mean literally nothing. But it just goes to show, Ole Miss, it feels like they should be better than they are. And you could still lose that game going down to Ole Miss, and you're probably not even favored, I would say, going down there if you're a betting man. But At the same time, I think that Ole Miss game, when you're looking at that month-long stretch and game, because again, Georgia and Missouri, you just need to win. But you're looking at games like, okay, which ones can Kentucky steal? That game at Ole Miss is probably the one I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'm liking the Tennessee game. I mean, I think that's the one you got to get because
that would be a huge statement.
That game,
yeah, that's a huge. That's a
is that the
rivalry
game
statement.
before South Carolina?
Yes. Well, and that's the thing too. Like that LSU game, it's unfortunate because tonight they play, or here on Friday they play South Carolina, and LSU probably going to lose that game. And they could win that game, but LSU, man, like, could you imagine undefeated LSU, Kim Mulkey, Flau'jae Johnson, and like that whole brand comes to Lexington. That game is on ESPN, not ESPN2, not ESPN Plus, ESPNU, ESPN,
Network.
like the ESPN. It would be great and now it's still going to be a massive game because of everything I just said. But man, imagine if LSU was undefeated coming into that game.
That'd be awesome.
All I'm asking for from Kentucky, I've used this word so much and I apologize, but please compete. Like, don't get blown out by like 30 at home. Like, that would suck. I just want to see a straight up like, oh my gosh, LSU's going to lose. Like one of those, and where it's like Kentucky ball down 3, a minute left.
I don't see
holding like your freaking breath in. You're just like, oh my gosh, they're going to do it.
I don't see a single game on the schedule where I don't think Kentucky will be competitive, except the South Carolina game scares me because it's at South Carolina. I don't know what the number is up to now. I think it's in the 60s of consecutive home game wins.
Yeah, it's up in the 60s.
And the SEC, even SEC wins straight.
Exactly.
It's like 53-0. That's insane.
And it's just like with South Carolina, they just beat Oklahoma by 40. I don't know what Kentucky's going to do in that game against South Carolina.
But
we're
assuming they're going to lose at Oklahoma, and they just beat them by 40.
You hope to God they don't lose by 40 at South Carolina.
That'd be a bad way to ruin all your momentum.
See, that's what I hate, too. It's the last game of the season. Like,
I wish it was like right now.
So I will say this 5-0 start is not necessarily historic, but something to look at. First time since 2012, 2013. They did go 30-6 that year, and they lost to UConn in the Elite Eight. So, and that's Breonna Stewart. You ain't going to win that game.
UConn.
I mean, you ain't got no choice in that game.
Gino and UConn have ended so many. Every time Kentucky went to the Elite Eight under Matthew Mitchell, I think it was UConn that eliminated. Like, that's ridiculous. I really hope Kentucky does not have to see them in the tournament.
Yeah. Again, the upper echelon of everybody.
Yeah.
Like, it's so redundant, and I hate talking about it, but it's just like those bigger teams, like, don't fail. Like, they are dynasties that are going on for almost a decade now. And it's like, are you going to beat them? No. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what do you think the game plan is for Coach Brooks going into South Carolina? Like, I know you don't tell your team, hey, we're probably going to lose this one, but how do you even, like, go about, hey, guys, have some hope. Like, we can do this thing.
Well, the thing with Coach Brooks is that he's been in this big moment where he played against national champion LSU in the Final Four.
He did.
Like,
he's not new to the pressure.
He won't, like, Coach Brooks, he's not worried about. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's worried. But he's not going to that game like chewing on his fingernails like, "Oh god, it's South Carolina." Like, it's a tough game. Try to end the season on a high note, but if you don't, there's the SEC tournament, and then there's the NCAA tournament. Like, South Carolina, it's not – sure, it sucks to end your regular season on that kind of game where you're most likely going to lose that game, but it's not the be-all, end-all of the year. We're talking about the 5-0 start. It's not historic as in it's not its own unique thing, but it is in a way that, well, it's the first time you started 5-0 since probably the best year you've ever had in the history of the school, if not the best year, probably the second best year behind that 82 team that Valerie Still was on. But the thing about this Kentucky team is, like, there's just so much potential of what they can do. It's ridiculous.
I can envision Kenny, too. Like, after South Carolina, you're going to ask him, like, how do you move forward? And he's going to be like, I'm going to tell them to keep doing what they're doing. It's not like anything's going to change.
Because it's nothing different. I mean, you start the season, they're on your schedule. You're going to play them at least one time. So it's not something you can run from. And you're coming to Kentucky not to run and hide from the best teams in the country. You're coming to try and upset them.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think, the other thing, too, in years past, South Carolina – so the way the SEC schedule works, you play everybody in the conference, but there's at least in women's basketball, there's one team you play twice.
This year it's Georgia.
I think from moving forward, I don't know if it'll be Georgia every year, but it used to be South Carolina every year. I think since the 80s, 90s, Kentucky's played South Carolina twice every single year, and they'd get beat basically every single game. But luckily, Georgia, a much more inferior opponent, is that team that you play twice. So it's hard for Kenny to complain about having to play South Carolina once when in years past you would have been playing them twice.
And it is scary going, like, previewing that LSU game when if you're going to play through Clara, is she going to go down there with Anissa? Like, probably not. I don't see her getting her 10 boards. I don't see that happening against the nation's leader. So, again, going into these games, obviously Kenny's had that pressure, and he's going to coach the team how he knows how to coach it, but the skill gap's still there, man.
Mm-hmm. One more little thing I thought was interesting so far. I was looking through some interesting stats that UK Athletics had posted about the women's team so far. These first 5 SEC wins are by at least 14. All of them have been by at least 14 for the first time in program history.
That's
so,
amazing.
I mean, they're wiping people pretty well. And I know we talked about it earlier, how we thought that Georgia game was – they obviously took their foot off the gas in the second half, at least we think. I'm sure they did. But, 14 that's a lot to just be consistently beating SEC teams by.
And I get there's the stigma of, and it's a fair one to have, of, well, look at who Kentucky's played so far in the SEC. Like, you've played, but like your first 2 games in the SEC, really good opponents in Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. But after that, Florida, Auburn, Georgia, and then Texas A&M and Arkansas coming up. I mean, those are all like literally the 5 worst teams in the conference.
Very
like
winnable
that,
games.
Yeah.
Like that. Like there is a fair point of, well, of course you're beating them by 14 points. You should, but that also goes back to the Vandy and Mississippi State games where those were tremendous wins for Kentucky.
The Vanderbilt win especially. I mean,
Yeah.
you have a National Player of the Year on Vanderbilt's roster, an away game, mind you that.
And that was a
That's
big
a crazy win.
Yeah.
That was a big win. Like they won by almost 20.
Yeah, 18, yeah.
Yeah.
And, I mean, again, I just think going forward, like you said, these must-wins, even though they're road games, A&M Arkansas got to win no matter what.
Yeah.
Because you cannot go into these ranked opponents.
Exactly. You need to because just counting wins you need to have, for the rest of this season. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's just the wins you have to have. So you count those. What's Kentucky 5-0 right now? That's 9-0. There's the wins you have to have. That would be A&M, Arkansas, and then Missouri and Georgia again.
Realistically, I think they can beat Ole Miss too. So it's 10-0, and then you have your Texas, LSU, Tennessee,
I don't think
Carolina.
there's a world where Kentucky goes winless in those games. I think Kentucky's going to pull off an upset between. And I don't even think Tennessee's an upset. Kentucky should probably beat Tennessee. But between Tennessee, LSU, Texas, and Oklahoma.
They'll get that Texas one, I feel.
And, I mean, Alabama, too.
Yeah.
Like, Kentucky's going to win 1 or 2 of those at least, I think.
Yeah.
I think Texas they feel good about because it's at home. Like I'm sure that they probably feel like that's an upset that they can pull off a lot more, with a little more ease than some of the other upsets that they would be pulling. I don't think if they beat Tennessee, I don't necessarily call that an upset.
No.
Regardless that Tennessee is ranked and good, Kentucky's ranked higher as of now. Sure, maybe historically it would be an upset. Not this season.
It's great to see it, though. The narrative's there.
Mm-hmm.
The crowd's going to show out. I mean, it's amazing.
Memorial Coliseum has been booming this year.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to see. I mean, here's the program last year. Boom, here it is this year. It's just a complete 360 in it. It's great to see.
I mean, I remember covering games last year when there were, and I think UK almost exaggerated the number of people that were at the games. I mean, it felt like there was 500 people at the very most at games last season. And, I mean.
Now, they make a layup with up 10 with 2 minutes left, and they roaring, and you're like, God, bro, like, chill out. Like, they won. Chill out.
Well, my thing is just, I mean, and I think about the South Carolina game because they played at Rupp last year due to the renovations. I mean, that place was pretty packed. It was 80% South Carolina fans, though. because everybody's like, ooh, Dawn Staley's in town. You know, it's called South Carolina's a pretty good traveling fan base. But the thing about Kentucky, I sit there and I think, like, man, this crowd is a little underwhelming today, or, you know, this isn't maybe as good as I think it should be. There's 5,000 people in the arena, you know, and that's just a tremendous kind of tremendous jump from last year to this year.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of Kernel at the Buzzer. Make sure you check us out at kykernel.com and at kykernelsports on X. Once again, my name has been Israel Schill. Thank you so much for watching.